denies that they are. Our own country denies that they are sophisticated weapons of this country.
This film was taken in 1952 by Delbert Newhouse, a Navy photographer, near Tremonton, Utah. He estimated that there were approximately a dozen metallic objects shaped like two saucers, one inverted on top of the other. The official explanation was that the objects were a flock of soaring gulls. But Dr. Baker had this to say.
Birds, such as gulls, simply don't make the kinds of accelerated turns at high speeds that were measured on the film. There also exists some meteorological data that would indicate that there were no updrafts that could have allowed the birds to maintain flight for long periods by simply spiraling.
It would seem more likely to me that it is some natural phenomena or even possibly something from outer space.
There is, however, another theory. The Bermuda Triangle is not the only area in which navigators have been troubled by the odd behavior of magnetic compasses. As every school child knows, something strange happens to your magnetic compass as you voyage into the Earth's polar regions. Scientists have turned to space, to the upper atmosphere, even to the sun, to account for this magnetic anomaly. But responsible reports suggest a greater mystery. A large concentration of UFO sightings in the Arctic and Antarctic has led some experts to speculate that these regions may serve as landing bases for extraterrestrial craft. It's even been suggested that the flying saucers, in fact, emerge from and re-enter the Earth's interior by polar doorways, and at the center of our planet is their true place of origin. In 1947, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, in command of the U.S. Navy Task Force, flew 1,700 miles beyond the North Pole, not as would be expected over frozen icy wastes, but across a vast land of mountains, freshwater lakes, rivers, green vegetation, and animal life, a land not recorded on any map. From the evidence provided by Admiral Byrd and other famous explorers of the Arctic and the Antarctic, it has been suggested that the Earth is not, as we have been taught, a solid sphere with a fiery center of molten metal, but is in fact a hollow shell in which a small amount of the original fire remains to form a central sun capable of emitting light and of supporting plant growth. It has even been claimed that the huge mammoths found frozen in the polar ice are not prehistoric, but were animals from the Earth's hollow interior that wandered to the surface and froze to death. Proponents of this theory estimate that the Earth's crust is approximately 800 miles thick, with openings at its polar extremities. They suggest that Admiral Byrd and other explorers actually entered the openings leading to the Earth's interior without knowing it. These explorers assumed that they were still traversing the outer surface because the downward slope of the entrance is so gradual and because they could not see the other side of the opening, which is hundreds of miles away. Almost to a man, scientists ridicule the hollow Earth theory. They will tell you that the only hollow spaces anywhere near the poles are located in the heads of those who believe in the theory. And yet a number of disquieting questions remain unanswered. How then do we account for the warming effect, the presence of increasingly warm winds as one travels north beyond 70 degrees latitude? Why do these winds carry enormous quantities of black dust? Why does colored pollen stain the snow red, green, and yellow over thousands of square miles of the Arctic? Why are all icebergs composed of fresh water? And why do explorers find tropical seeds and plants and even trees floating in the fresh water off these icebergs? Where do all these things come from? Well, the answer to these questions is obvious to anyone who believes in the existence of an unexplored region hidden in the Earth's interior. But the hollow Earth theory is not limited to this planet. In his book, A Journey to the Earth's Interior, Marshall B. Gardner discusses the bright lights seen shining from the polar caps of Mars, Venus, and Mercury. Concludes that these planets also have hollow interiors and central suns. According to Gardner, the aurora borealis, the northern lights, result from the rays of that central sun inside the Earth, projected through the polar opening into the night sky. Now, before we join in the laughter of scientists at these notions, we should remember that 100 years ago, the world's most prominent astronomers staked their reputations on the fact that rocks did not fall from the sky. Today, these rocks are called meteorites. Science, like any living thing, must grow. Now, one of the crucial new questions for scientists is how to travel through deep space. Are there cosmic arteries, openings maybe in the fabric of the space-time continuum? In the past, man ascribed immortality to the stars. But now we know that, like ourselves, stars are born, grow old, and eventually die. At the end of their lifetime, stars only a little heavier than our sun suddenly blaze up in a supernova explosion, becoming giant galactic flares that collapse into white dwarfs and then eventually burn out to become black dwarfs, each about the size of the Earth. If the star is somewhat heavier, it will collapse to a much smaller and far more compressed neutron star about 10 miles in diameter. But what happens to stars at least 3 times the size of our sun? Those which do not reach a quiet old age as a neutron or dwarf star. Scientists believe that the collapse of these enormous stars is so powerful that once it begins, nothing can ever stop it. They continue to shrink until the gravitational field surrounding them is so strong it becomes completely closed off from the rest of space. Nothing that enters this region can ever escape, not even light. And so these stars become invisible black holes in the fabric of space. Stars that have blinked out and died, yet are still there, exercising a devastating effect on every particle of matter that enters their gravitational fields. Where gravity is so intense, it warps space, imprisons light, halts time. Astronomers are now speculating about the possibilities of huge rotating black holes in which the tremendous distortion of time and space is so extreme as to generate a passageway to another world. A future astronaut plunging down a rotating black hole could perhaps never return or communicate again with our world. But he might emerge in a different time, a different corner of the universe, or perhaps even a different universe. And it's not so unlikely that an advanced technological civilization could have overcome the hazards of black hole travel, harnessed their power to voyage through time as well as through space. In his stunning book, The Cosmic Connection, astronomer Carl Sagan imagines for us a federation of societies in the galaxy that have established a black hole rapid transit system in which a vehicle is rapidly routed through an interlaced network of black holes to that black hole nearest to its destination. As even more dramatic evidence of interplanetary penetration, we can look to Siberia just after the turn of the century. An unidentified space object hurtled toward Earth at over 30,000 miles an hour. Trailing streams of fire, it broke into our atmosphere, and then came the explosion. Equal in force to a thermonuclear blast. A huge mushroom of fire and smoke, an explosion like none recorded on Earth before that left traces of radioactivity and felled trees within a 40-mile radius. And yet there was no sign of a crater.
On January 7, 1948, officials at Godman Air Force Base near Fort Knox, Kentucky, observed a strange object passing over them at high speed. Minutes later, at 2:30 p.m., a squadron of P-51 fighters approaching from the south was asked by the Godman Tower to investigate the UFO. Captain Thomas Mantell, the squadron leader, left the formation and began to climb. At 2:45, Mantell notified the tower he was at 15,000 feet.
There's something in sight above and ahead of me. Some kind of a huge metal object, but it's not a plane. I'm going to 20,000 feet.
At 3:15, Mantell radioed again.
It's now directly ahead of me and moving at about my speed. I'm trying to close for a better look.
That was Captain Mantell's last transmission. All further attempts to reach him failed. Less than an hour later, searchers found the plane. Mantell was dead. His shattered watch had stopped at 3:18.
Does our military have in its possession the twisted metal remains of crashed UFOs, the charred bodies of space crewmen? I don't know. There are no easy answers, but one thing is clear. With the formidable resources at its disposal, the American military has to have the best collection of UFO data in the world. And I really think it's time they shared that data with the people. I must say I have some sympathy for the military, especially the Air Force, whose province is, after all, the wild blue yonder. What do you do when something unknown is penetrating your airspace and you can't cope with it? The bureaucratic solution seems to be, when in doubt, classify. But I also have real sympathy with the people who are the victims of this policy, people whose lives will never be the same because they had the courage to report what they saw. I admit some people have been seeing some pretty strange things lately. One of the strangest and most bizarre is the appearance of huge hairy creatures that walk upright on two legs and are frequently sighted in areas where UFO activity has been reported.
Somewhere in these dense forests lurks something for whose origin and existence science can offer no earthly explanation. Called Sasquatch in Canada, Bigfoot in the western states, Folk Monster in Arkansas, Momo in Missouri, Skunk Ape in the Florida Everglades, these foul-smelling giants, some of them reportedly 10 feet in height, crash around in the undergrowth, uproot trees, invade logging camps, and terrify witnesses. What are these creatures? Where do they come from? How did they get here? Recently, an astonishing number of Bigfoot reports have coincided with UFO sightings and landings. Are the UFOs dropping these creatures here to see if they can live on our Earth? And why has no one found any bones or the remains of one of them? Do these giants, as psychic Peter Herkus claims, decompose into powder when they die? Or are they perhaps picked up again by the UFOs to be examined in alien laboratories? Is the Bigfoot a cosmic mutation? Incredible as this notion may seem, we're contemplating even stranger possibilities in our own laboratories. In 1818, when Mary Shelley first conceived of the Baron Frankenstein, the idea of one human being fabricating another was sheer fantasy. Now the inconceivable has become a near reality, as scientists around the world do research in the new and ominous field of genetic engineering. By a process known as cloning, we can now reproduce genetically identical copies of an individual organism. Already, experiments in cloning plants and lower animal forms have been successful. The way has been paved for similar experiments with human cells. At the University of California at San Diego, Dr. Walter Desmond is carrying out research in cloning.
In this laboratory, we're working with a variety of cultured cell lines. These are cells originating from various tissues in the body, which can grow essentially forever in culture vessels. The material from which we start, the animal tissue, is made up of a number of different kinds of cells. Since we are often interested in studying only one cell type, it is desirable to have cultures which come from a single cell. We would expect then all cells in such a culture to be identical. This is accomplished by cloning, putting a very small number, even one cell, in a culture dish and allowing the individual cells to grow. Colonies of cells arising where there was originally only one can be isolated and studied with the assurance that all of these cells are of identical origin. There is still some question whether cells of higher animals have this potential.
At the University of Indiana, Dr. Janice Brothers has been doing extensive work on the development of lower animal forms, such as salamanders, from a single parental source. Thus, the new specimen salamander grows up to be essentially an identical twin, a generation removed, of the single parent.
Axolotls are a type of salamander which come from Lake Yacamoco in Mexico. The axolotl is useful to scientists because many mutations have been described in this animal. The development of each characteristic of the body is controlled by genes. A change in a gene is called a mutation. Some of the mutations that have been found in the axolotl affect the development of the eye.